Welcome to the Dragon's Library, your source for games, movies, shows, and more.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Dragon's Library. Today, we have something special. So, as some of you may know, because I've mentioned it a few times on the show, where you just keep up with movies in general, well, the new Dune movie is going to be coming out next Thursday. So, as part of my, a little context. I've never actually read Dune or seen the old movie. So I decided over the last month, I've been, doing sampling the audiobook for Dune. I eventually finished it. It took me a little while. It's just a little, no, not the review yet. And so I also recently tonight watched the Dune movie by David Lynch from the 70s. And tonight, we're going to have a double feature review! Isn't that great? So we're going to be reviewing Dune, the book by Frank Herbert, and then Dune, the movie directed by David Lynch, based on a book by Frank Herbert. So, yeah. I hope you guys like this, and I can't wait to review the new Dune movie and see how it compares. So, to get started, let's talk about the Dune book. For those of you who don't know, Dune is a very influential and very important sci-fi book by Frank Herbert. The original Dune novel is one of those big, important works of sci-fi that's kind of heavily influenced modern-day science fiction. It's probably a pretty well-known movie well-known book just because it's been talked about and parodied a lot. But the book itself is very interesting in its own right. The basis of the book is it's set in the distant future, 20,000 years in the future or something like that. It's in the middle of this, new age, feudal society with this giant space empire. Think Warhammer 40k, but not as ironic. And a lot more Game of Thronesy. Very Game of Thronesy, actually. Very Game of Thronesy. Lots of political backstabbing and nonsense like that. And, in the future, science fiction and space travel has become, the big thing, piloted by the Spacer Guild, who rely on a powerful substance known as the melange or the spice. It's a drug that it's basically a drug that extends life, expands mental abilities, can let one predict the future, and also gives one the ability to do the immense calculations necessary to do teleportation-style advanced space travel. So, this stuff literally runs the universe. The Galactic Empire is basically run by the Emperor. And under him are various houses that hold titles like barons and dukes. And in addition to that, you also have the spice, which is controlled partially which is needed for the Spacer Guild to allow all these different players to move around. Now, the big problem is spice is only found on one planet in the known universe. The desert planet Arrakis. And I gotta admit, this place, Frank Herbert is a master of, just the setting. This setting is extremely well thought out, extremely interesting, and I could spend hours just reading the Wikipedia pages. In fact, I have spent hours just reading the Wikipedia pages about everything that's happened later on after the first book. It is definitely one of the most interesting things out there. I might even read the sequels, because there's just so much more to explore on this planet, the mysteries of Arrakis and of Dune. The potential powers of melange. It's all very, very fascinating. My experience with Dune is limited beforehand. I mostly know of it from this big... so for those who don't know, Cartoon Network had this show called The Grim Adventure of Billy Mandy, where they had, this evil girl Mandy, this idiot Billy, and they got the Grim Reaper to agree to be their best friend forever because they beat him in a game of Limbo, not chess, because it's a kid's show. And in one of the episodes, they look into Mandy's future to find out she's, basically turned into the God Emperor of later books in the Dune series. I think the main character is, son. And she, fuses herself with a worm to gain immortality, and the spice she controls is cinnamon, which allows her to maintain her immortality, not melange. It's a big parody of Dune, basically. Which was really interesting, but, that's basically the most I'd heard about it. I also know about the sandworms, the spice, melange, the spice. He who controls the spice controls the universe. Things like that. I had known that it was one of those series that had a lot of different adaptations, had a few adventure game adaptations. It was this big space opera with a lot of, backstabbing and political maneuvering and mysticism. But I didn't really know much about the actual plot. And I'm going to give you a basic rundown. So, currently, the empire is embroiled in a conflict between two great houses, House Atreides and House Harkonnen, both trying to compete to basically become the successors to the current emperor. He currently only has a daughter, and so they're both trying to prove that they deserve to inherit the emperor's mantle. The Harkonnens are evil and kind of nasty and go into a lot of depraved practices. The Atreides are a lot more noble, or at least they tell out the image of being more noble. It's a bit more gray morality than outright black and white morality. Though the Harkonnens are portrayed as being more cutthroat and more cruel to their people. Meanwhile, there's also a group of witches, the Bene Gesserit, who use the spice to gain powerful precognitive abilities and train themselves to notice the slightest changes in people. And they act as a sort of political structure in and of themselves, that's tied to the Emperor, but also their own sort of faction who have been trying to create a super being for a long time. One of their members is the concubine of the Atreides Lord, Duke Leto. And she had a son with him, which she was not supposed to do because only women are supposed to go through the trials because most men fail to go through them. One is destined to eventually survive and become the perfect being. And, she tried to make her son, Paul Atreides, the main character of the book, into that person. On Arrakis, they're the Fremen. They're a native species getting caught up in this whole war. It's heavily implied to be sort of a Saudi Arabia kind of parallel too, because they have the spice, which is very valuable resources. A lot of foreign nations are coming to claim, and they literally lead a jihad at one point. They call it that. So yeah, it's a very not so subtle parallel. And one of the things that makes Dune a book, I think, really hard to adapt is it's one of those books that heavily utilizes the format of a novel. That is to say, there's a lot of internal monologues, there's a lot of exposition the characters go through, there are small little bits where the Princess Irulan from the teachings on Muad'Dim at the beginning of each chapter, little things like that slowly flesh out the world and make it feel real that are really difficult to do in a movie. Or even just something else. Some of the best adaptations of Dune, from what I understand, have come from video games because they give you that same kind of I can flesh everything out through background details and notes and stuff like that. But it's really hard to flesh it out in a movie. But we'll get to that in the second part of this review. Dune is a really interesting book. The planet Arrakis is this giant desert with sandstorms. Water is basically non-existent on the planet. Literally, it never rains. And so, whenever you go out into the sands, you have to use this still suit, which conserves your water, so you only use about a thimble of it a day. It, reuses your sweat, your pee, everything. Literally everything. It's a little gross. But it also keeps you alive. And the Fremen there have different customs. For example, to spit on the floor at someone is not an insult. It's, I give up a drop of water for you. Literally, it'd be like if you could spit gold and you spit a little bit of gold on the ground and gave it to someone until they could, pay for some minor tip. It's like, I will part my water as a sign of respect. And their burial customs literally involve the water being reclaimed from the dead because it's so valuable, so needed, Which I thought was really interesting. Frank Herbert really thought out how a planet that's literally just a giant desert would work. The Fremen are also fleshed out in the later on in the book as Paul becomes one of them. He joins up and they basically take him. The Bene Gesserit, when they went to the planet, basically planted the seeds of their perfect being in myth in various planets they went to. So they believe that, the son of Bene Gesserit and a lord will one day become their messiah, the Muad'Dim, who will lead them to freedom. And it's weird. It's almost it's kind of like, or also, by the way, Star Wars. Really, you got a lot of stuff for this Star Wars. You owe Dune a lot. Seriously, send Dune some of that Star Wars money, because kind of owe him a lot of concepts. You find a lot of things from, especially the prequels, I find. the prequels were drawing on Dune pretty heavily. Like, really heavily. It's very clear. But, yeah, I think Dune's a very good book. I mean, yeah, it goes without saying, it's a pretty good book, obviously. It's one of the, most influential sci-fi books of all time. Duh. But I do genuinely think it's extremely interesting and well thought out. I'm not sure I would love it that much. It's one of those books I kind of had to force myself to keep reading because the way the story's told is just a little dry for me. But I've always had that problem with a lot of older stories, and I'm not entirely sure whether I should blame that on Dune or not. One thing I did really like about the book, though, is Paul. He comes across less as, like, this naturally good at everything Messiah and more as someone, like, cursed by his family. Like, when he finally has his, like, breakdown after basically there's this big betrayal in the first act, and when it happens, he and his mother are, like, the last survivors of their house. Everyone else has been killed, and Leto is definitely dead now. And he comes to this realization as his powers awaken fully for the first time, and he realizes he sees the past, the future, the present, all of it so clearly. The spice is a poison, and it's infested them. Now they can never truly leave Arrakis. They are part of it. And his mother has doomed him to this. She made him this. And he feels like someone cursed to try and make the best of a good situation. I actually read some more about him in later books, and he seems to really form strong ties with the Fremen, and takes being their leader seriously. Like, he accepts their customs. He becomes one of them in true fashion. He's not just, like, leading them as an army like his father wanted him to. He becomes one of them. In fact, from what I read in his Wikipedia page, in the later books, when he goes blind, the Fremen have a custom that the blind must offer themselves to the sandworm to maintain the cycle and not be a burden on their tribes. And when he loses his precognition, after he was unable to predict the birth of his son, he takes this as a meaning that he has truly and completely lost his sight. And so he walks out into the deserts, fully fulfilling their customs, showing the Fremen he wasn't just some guy they chose to lead him, some messiah that came down. He truly became one of them and was willing to respect their customs as he had taken them as his own. And it becomes a big deal for them. He wasn't just some, random guy who came down. He decided to become one of them. And since this is an alien world, they were originally colonists as well who came from other worlds. So he truly became a Fremen. Which I actually really liked that. I liked the tension between these other people trying to influence the Fremen and Paul trying to coming to see them as a sort of extended family. That was actually really interesting, and I thought it was one of the better parts of the book. Actually, it's part of the reason I want to read the later books is because I want to see Paul go through these trials and tribulations after he becomes emperor. But yeah, it's a really landmark piece of sci-fi that truly investigates the main concept. What if this most valuable substance in the universe came from a planet as inhospitable as Arrakis? I liked the backstabbing and plotting. The first act plays out like a Greek tragedy. It really does. Which, as a giant nerd, I loved. Like, as I was reading it, I was, like, noticing, I was like, okay, so we know everything, like, because one of the main things about Greek tragedy was that it wasn't about how things were going to happen. We knew that this guy, Oedipus, we already knew he killed his actual father and was sleeping with his mother. We knew that from the very beginning of the story, basically. That happened at the very beginning. It takes the characters realizing it. And from the very beginning, we see the Harkonnens plotting. We know exactly who the traitor is. We know the Emperor is involved. We know that the Atreides think they're prepared but aren't really. And we see exactly how they were going to fall way before they actually fell. And when Paul's crying out in the desert, we know everything that led to that final realization of his life crashing down around him and revenge becoming his driving goal. We saw it. And that hit me really hard. I think the first third of the book was probably the most engaging section. The 2-year time skip, him training the Fremen, the final battle, they're all cool, but I lived for that first third. That might sound really weird because you think the space battles are what you're there for, but no. The Spacer Guild is also a cool concept. They're humans who may or may not have been, who apparently have been, mutated by the spice. We don't really see a lot of them in the book. They're kind of this distant concept. They don't really talk to people at all. No one sees them aside from their most trusted servants. They only interact with others through intermediaries. And they're humans who basically have indulged so much spice that they're able to pilot these massive starships that like fold space to teleport them between worlds. It's a really cool concept. From what I understand from the movie, they look like really deformed and stuff like that. I verified the books also described them as such, probably in the later books. But yeah, very cool. Loved it. I don't really have that much else to say about the book in particular. The Lady Jessica was fun. Paul's love interest was okay. She was just kind of fine. Like, she was alright, I guess. I don't know. I've just never been one for the destined, I saw you before we ever met kind of thing. It's just never been my jam. Yeah. The Harkonnens come across as really evil and cruel, but they also come across as, like, intelligent in a way that you don't usually see with villains. Like, you clearly understand how this guy got to be a Baron. He's very careful. Baron Harkonnen is really careful and plotting and contained. And when his son tries to be rash, he always, not his son, his nephew, that he wants to push to be the emperor, he really pushes him to be better. Like, he's like, I've chosen you because you're smarter than this. You tried to assassinate me, and I can respect that. But I need to make something clear to you. I'm not going anywhere, and you need to stop being a rash idiot, or you're not going to be ready for the crown. I will step down willingly and go into retirement when you're ready to become emperor and make our family line important. Which I really liked. This comes across as a guy that's very threatening and menacing. Which is good because they describe him as like this overweight blob, so he better have a really plotting, evil, contained self to him. Otherwise, like, why would I be afraid of him? Hint, hint, movie. But yeah, so Dune, really solid book. I would recommend it for anyone who's into good sci-fi. Now, on to the next part of this little talk of ours. We have the Dune movie by David Lynch. And what do I even say about this thing? Okay, so a lot of people have called this a bad movie. Some people have used it as an example of the fact that Dune is just unfilmable. Like, there's no way you can make a good version of Dune. And I have to kind of agree with them. Now, I think the first part of this movie is alright. It skips over a minor plotline with Jessica being seen as the traitor instead of Yui. But aside from that, it hits the major beats of the first act. And I think it was alright. It wasn't amazing. I think the book is still better on the whole. But it wasn't terrible. And then the second and third acts came. Okay, look, I understand that Dune is a really long book. The audio version of Dune that I listened to was over 20 hours, okay? I understand you have to cut some things for time. But OMG, the second act was like a clip show of the must-film scenes from the Dune book. Like, it would literally have a scene interrupted with, like, there was this one scene where they were trying to get onto the giant worms to ride the worms, which was a really cool scene in the movie. But, oh my god, in the middle of it, they just, like, jump cut to his, like, Fremen officers, like, his most trusted legions being, given war paint to signify the red-blooded uniforms, signify they're your elite guard, my lord. And then it cuts back to the worm, like, this movie is all over the place. It doesn't seem to know how to stay on one thing and focus on it for a time. It's trying to hit everything in the movie, and in doing so, it kind of doesn't hit anything effectively, which I really have a problem with. My other big problem with the movie is the Harkonnens. I hate what they did to the Harkonnens in this. I think the Mentat that he serves with, oh my god, what's the Mentat's name that serves the Harkonnens? I forget him. He gets killed early on. But he's pretty good. He's decent. But Baron Harkonnen is just like, don't get me wrong, they kind of got the whole, he's this disgusting blob guy who has to use like magnetic stuff to, lift himself off the ground. But OMG, is just, the actor is too over the top. I could not, every time he had like a menacing laughing moment and started flying all over the place, I just started laughing. And when your villain is making his big dramatic speech, the last thing your audience should be doing is laughing. But that's all I could do. So yeah, I have a big problem with this movie. I think the first part is pretty decent, and the third act is an alright payoff. And to be honest, it's hard to point out what they could have done that's better other than give it another hour or two. Like, I genuinely feel that Dune is the kind of thing you need to give an in-game style movie to. Like, this can't be a 2-hour movie. This needs to be a 3 or 4 hour, like, Tolkien or Avengers Endgame kind of movie where you have to say to the audience, look, this is a story that requires a time commitment. If you can't accept that time commitment, you need to get out of here. That's not to say it's entirely bad. The shield effects are pretty terrible. They're 80s CG, so, that's just, ugh. But aside from that, most of the effects are pretty good. The Dune worms were very impressive. I had seen a few shots of them, and I wasn't sure I was going to like them, but I gotta admit, seeing them in the movie totally changed my mind. Those puppets are amazing. Loved them. Some of the best giant alien worm effects I've ever seen. I love doing this show because I get to say stuff like the best giant alien worm effects I've ever seen. That's a statement I've made. I love that I'm able to make it. But I did think it was a lot of fun. I actually watched the movie with my dad because he loves this movie. And when he heard I was going to do reviews on it, I was going to go see the original, he was like, "Oh, you have to watch it." I'm like, "All right, Dad, we can set a time, and I'll watch it like right before the other one comes out so I can review it. With it fresh in my mind." And he was like, every week the past 3 weeks, he's been like, "Can we watch it now? Can we watch it now? Can we watch it now?" And I was just so excited to watch it with him. It was a really fun time. We had fun together. And at the very least, this movie was fun. It had some decent special effects, some really cool scenes. I can see why some people like it, because it does definitely have some of those iconic scenes. The very tense moment with the hunter-killer probe that almost kills Paul. You have the awesome worm riding scenes, the final battle with them riding the worms into fight, that moment where the worms come and bow before him when he drinks the waters of life. All very cool, all very iconic. Some of the voice acting was very good. I will freely admit that. I'm not above that. I love the opening narration by the Princess Irulan, because one of my favorite parts about listening to this book was every chapter was appended by, "And this is a tale recorded by the Princess Irulan from the teachings of Muad'Dib." And I was like, oh, it built on the world as you slowly flesh out and as you read more, you slowly understand more and more what they were saying. And when, he eventually marries the Princess Irulan to solidify his place in the movie, in the book at least, he marries the Princess Irulan to secure his right as the new emperor. In the movie, however, she's not really mentioned at all, which is weird, because she was doing the narration at the very beginning. I thought she was going to pop up. But she didn't. They also don't have Paul's son come up a lot, because in the books he was killed in one of the final battles, but in the movie he just doesn't show up at all, which fine. They do have a sister, which, holy shit, she's creepy. His sister is terrifying. So her mom basically took the waters of life, which Paul did, to become nearly omniscient, but she took it to become the new head Bene Gesserit, sort of Yoda version of the Jedi, the most powerful one. One of Jedi Council member kind of styles for if you're talking about mysticism, space wizards. But she was pregnant at the time, so her daughter was born with that power naturally in her, and it's slowly going to be driving her mad. There's a big scene in the movie where the Bene Gesserit next to the Emperor is like, "Kill her! She's an abomination!" And he's like, "Silence!" And the child is just like, "Silence!" And she's causing this grown woman who's been working with her powers her entire life to start crying on the floor because she's just so OP. And from what I've heard, she eventually causes, she becomes a major villain later on. She becomes possessed by ancestral spirits and stuff like that. Really weird, really space crazy stuff. Again, if you're looking for, fun space insanity, this is definitely the series for it. It has some really out there ideas, and its world is very well thought out. Again, the movie does have problems. I won't deny it, but I also won't deny that the movie is genuinely trying to have fun with itself. Aside from the way they portray the Harkonnens, most of the stuff is pretty accurate. And it's a really difficult thing to do with this movie in general. I'm actually glad that we had the precedent of, 3 and 4 hour movies now, so I'm really Really hoping the new Dune movie is going to be 3 or 4 hours. I don't know exactly how long it's supposed to be this time, but I'm really, 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 really hoping it's not going to be like a 2-hour movie. Because I genuinely don't think you can do Dune as a 2-hour movie. I just don't. There isn't enough time to fully explain the plot. Like even this movie that tries to do its very best, it's just jumping from one point to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And it's just like it goes from being really slow and ponderous at the beginning to jump, 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 next point, next point, next set piece, next set piece. Okay, we have a brief talking desert. All right, that went on for 5 minutes. Time for 2 set pieces back to back. And I just have a little problem with that. But yeah, I would recommend checking these out if you have time before the Dune movie comes out. They're both a lot of fun. I think Dune is kind of essential reading for those who really want to get into old sci-fi. It's inspired a lot of stuff. Like, seriously, this is where Tatooine came from. I'm just saying it. George, we know you got Tatooine from Dune. You can admit it. It's okay. It's a landmark piece of sci-fi. It came out in the 60s. It's okay to admit it. But, yeah. If you guys want to, let me know if you want me to do anything else. I'm actually going to be taking requests now. So if you want to shoot me up an email, say, hey, I really like this. You haven't reviewed this. I really like you to review it. Send it to me. I'm totally up for suggestions. And I'm always looking for new things to enjoy. So yeah, see you guys next time. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, and thank you for listening to the Dragon's Library. Please subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes. The Dragon's Library releases new episodes Tuesday and Friday each week, and you can follow us on Twitter at dragon_library2. If you want to suggest an episode topic, my email is in the description below. And as always, thank you so much for all your support.